In a small and quiet village far away from the noise of cities, there was a farm surrounded by green fields and tall trees. On this farm lived many animals, but among them was one who was different, one who drew every eye, not because of beauty, but because of size. She was a cow, larger than any other cow people had seen, too big, too heavy, and too unusual for the farmers. Her body was strong, her legs were thick, and her presence was impossible to ignore. But while her outside looked powerful, her heart was soft and her eyes told a story of sadness. Every day she stood quietly, watching the world go by. Other cows played, ate grass, and rested, but she was always apart, always separated. The farmers whispered among themselves. "She is too big to breed," they said, shaking their heads. To them, her size was not a blessing, it was a curse. They wanted cows who could give calves, cows who could bring them profit, but she could not, and so they called her useless. This cow, who had done nothing wrong, became a burden in the eyes of humans. The farmers looked at her not as a living soul, but as a problem they needed to solve. The children of the village sometimes passed by and pointed at her. "Look at that giant cow," they would say, laughing. And though she never made a sound, inside her heart was breaking. She wanted love, she wanted care, but no one gave it to her. At night, when the farm was quiet, she would lay on the cold ground, her big body heavy with loneliness. Her eyes would wander to the stars, as if asking the sky why she was born different. The moonlight touched her face, and in that moment, she looked less like a beast and more like a soul searching for hope. But in the morning, reality always returned, harsh and cruel. The farmers grew impatient, their voices turned colder. "She eats too much, she gives us nothing." They complained. Day after day their anger grew, and so did her fear. One evening, when the sun was setting in deep red and orange, the decision was made. The head farmer gathered his men and said with a firm voice, "She is no use to us. She is too big to breed, too big to care for. We will sell her for meat." Those words fell heavy like a stone. The other farmers nodded, not one of them questioned it. To them, she was just weight, just cost, just flesh. But to the cow, those words meant the end of everything. That night, she could not sleep. The wind was cold, but the fear in her heart was colder. She did not understand everything humans said, but she felt it. She knew. Her eyes filled with tears as she lay down on the hard floor. She thought of the fields she would never see again, the grass she would never taste, the sun she would never feel. She thought of freedom, a dream she never had, but always wished for. And in her silence, she cried without a sound. The next morning, the farm was alive with noise. Men moved around quickly, preparing ropes and chains. The other animals watched from a distance, some with fear, some with sadness. They seemed to know what was happening. The giant cow stood quietly, her legs trembling, her heart racing. She did not resist, she did not fight. Perhaps deep inside, she thought resistance would not change anything. Her eyes only looked to the gate of the farm, the gate that would take her away. Was it the gate of freedom or the gate of death? She did not know. As the men approached, the sun rose higher. Its light touched her one last time, as if giving her strength. And in that moment, something stirred in the air, a tension, a mystery. The farm was noisy, yet strangely it felt like time had slowed down. Every sound, every step, every breath was heavy with suspense. The cow's heart beat louder and louder, echoing like a drum inside her chest. Her story was about to change, but how and by whom, no one yet knew. And so her journey began. A journey that would take her from despair to hope, from chains to freedom. But for now, all she knew was fear. All she knew was that her life was in the hands of humans who saw her as nothing. And as the men tied the rope around her neck, leading her away, the question hung heavy in the air. Would anyone ever see her not as meat, not as burden, but as life? Or was this truly the end of her story? The ropes were tight, pulling against her skin as the men dragged her forward. The giant cow walked slowly, each step heavy with fear, each breath shaking with sadness. She did not understand the full meaning of the farmer's words, but she felt the truth. She knew she was being taken away, not to a place of comfort, but to her end. The farm that had been her world now faded behind her. The barn where she once slept, the fields where she once stood, all became smaller and smaller in the distance. She looked back with wide eyes, as if searching for a reason, as if hoping someone would stop this, but no one did. No one cared enough. To the farmers, she was only weight, a mouth that ate too much and gave too little. They whispered to each other as they walked. "She is nothing but cost," one said. "Better to sell her now, at least we get money for meat," another replied. Each word struck her like a knife, cutting deeper into her silent heart. The road to the market was long, dusty and cruel. The sun beat down on her back. Her legs shook under the weight of her body. The ropes pulled tighter whenever she slowed, leaving red marks on her neck. People passed by on the road. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with pity. But no one spoke for her. No one dared to stop the farmers. She was just another animal to them. Another story that would end in silence. By the time they reached the market, her heart was already broken. The market was loud, filled with the cries of animals, the voices of men shouting prices, the clatter of cages and chains. The smell of fear hung heavy in the air. Everywhere she turned, she saw despair. Goats tied to posts, chickens trapped in baskets, sheep herded into pens, all waiting for the same fate. The giant cow stood taller than all of them, but inside she felt smaller than ever. Her large body was nothing but a target for more eyes, more judgment, more cruelty. The farmers pulled her into the center, tying her where everyone could see. Buyers gathered, their eyes scanning her body, from head to hoof. "She is massive," one man said with a calculating voice. "Too big for breeding, but look at all that meat," another answered. The cow lowered her head, her ears catching every word. Her soul understood the meaning, even if the language was not her own. They did not see her heart. They did not see her life. They only saw flesh. Flesh to weigh, flesh to cut, flesh to sell. One by one, men stepped closer, touching her sides, pressing her legs, measuring her. With greedy eyes, her body trembled, but she did not fight, she did not resist. Perhaps she knew that in this place, resistance was useless. A tear rolled from her eye, falling silently onto the dust below. But no one noticed, no one cared. They laughed, they bargained, they shouted louder, and in the middle of it all, she stood like a shadow, unseen as a soul, seen only as a body. The bidding began. The auctioneer's voice rose above the noise, sharp and cold. "Who will take this cow, strong and heavy, too big to breed but perfect for meat?" he declared. Hands lifted in the crowd, voices called. Out numbers, with every number her heart sank deeper. With every shout her hope grew weaker. She looked around desperately, searching for even one kind face, one sign of mercy. But all she saw were eyes filled with hunger, not for kindness, but for gain. The sun moved higher, casting shadows across the market. The cow felt the rope cut deeper into her neck as men pulled her closer to the buyers. Her breath came faster, her legs nearly gave way. The world spun around her, the noise louder than her thoughts. In her silence, she prayed to the wind, to the sky, to anyone who might hear her. Her prayer was simple. Please let someone see me as more than meat. Please let someone see me as life. But the voices only grew stronger. The bidding rose higher. The farmers smiled, happy with the price, and she stood in the middle of it all, drowning in despair. Her eyes turned once more to the gate of the market, the gate she had entered tied and chained. She wondered if that gate would ever open for her again, not to lead her to death, but to lead her to freedom. The harsh reality was clear. To the world around her, she was not a soul, not a being, not a life worth saving. She was only numbers, only weight, only profit. And as the auctioneer's voice shouted the final call, the crowd roared in agreement. The price was set. The giant cow lowered her head, her body shaking with sorrow. It seemed that her fate had been sealed. It seemed that the world had already decided her ending. But deep within that crowded market, unseen by most, a figure stood quietly. Their eyes were not like the others, not filled with greed, but with something else. Something softer, something stronger. And though the cow could not know it yet, her story was not over. The harsh reality was about to take a turn that would change everything. For sometimes, in the middle of despair, hope walks in silently, unseen, until the very last moment. The auction yard was filled with noise, the sound of men bargaining, animals crying, and chains rattling. The giant cow stood in the center, her body tied with ropes, her head lowered, her heart heavy. The sun burned above, and the dust of the market rose around her like a cloud of despair. Everywhere she looked, she saw eyes measuring her, eyes that saw not life, but weight, not soul, but price. The auctioneer raised his hand, his voice loud and commanding. "Look here, everyone. A cow too big to breed, but strong and heavy, worth every coin," he shouted. The crowd pressed closer, their eyes hungry, their voices rising in excitement. Numbers flew through the air, the bidding began, and with every shout the cow's hope grew weaker. One man stepped forward, his clothes dirty, his eyes sharp. "She will bring good money for meat," he said. With a grin, another man laughed. "Yes, she's useless for calves, but look at the size. One cut could feed a family for weeks." Their laughter echoed, cruel and heartless. The cow shivered, her legs trembling, her eyes filled with silent tears. The bidding rose higher, faster, like a storm with no end. The auctioneer's hammer lifted, ready to fall, ready to seal her fate. The farmers watched with greedy smiles, proud of the profit they were about to make. To them, this was victory, not tragedy. But in the middle of the crowd, one figure stood still, quiet and unseen. This figure did not shout, did not laugh, did not join the noise. Their eyes were fixed only on the cow, not on her size, not on her weight, but on her sorrow. Where others saw meat, this figure saw pain. Where others saw profit, this figure saw life. And in that moment, something powerful stirred. A decision, forming silently in their heart. The bidding reached its peak. The auctioneer's voice grew louder. "Last call, anyone else, or she is sold," he shouted. The cow's heart raced, her breath quickened. Her eyes darted desperately across the crowd. Was this the end? Was this the last moment she would stand under the sun? Her body trembled, and her ears caught the sharp sound of the hammer about to fall. But before the auctioneer could strike the final blow, a voice rose above the crowd. "I'll take her," the voice said, clear and firm. The noise of the crowd stopped for a moment, all eyes turned to see who had spoken. It was the quiet figure stepping forward with calm steps, their gaze steady and unshaken. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. "Do you understand she is too big to breed? Too costly to keep. She is only good for meat," he warned, but the figure's voice did not shake. "I know what she is and I still want her," they replied. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like fire. "Why waste money on her?" one man sneered. "She is useless," another spat. But the figure ignored them all, their eyes never leaving the cow. The cow lifted her head slowly, her tired eyes meeting the gaze of this stranger. For the first time she saw something she had never seen before. Not greed, not cruelty, not judgment, but kindness, soft and deep. Her heart trembled with confusion. Could it be real? Or was it only another trick? Another false hope? The auctioneer sighed, then slammed the hammer down. "Sold," he declared, his voice echoing across the market. The farmers smiled with greed, happy to take their money. The crowd shook their heads, calling the buyer a fool. But the figure did not care. Their steps carried purpose, their hands firm as they signed the papers. When the ropes were handed over, the cow expected pain. She expected rough hands, harsh tugs, and cruel shouts, but instead, the ropes loosened gently. The pull was soft, careful, almost respectful. For the first time, she felt a touch that did not harm her. Her legs still trembled, her body still feared, but her heart whispered something new. Hope, fragile and uncertain, but alive. The crowd began to leave. The noise faded, but whispers followed the figure. "Crazy human," they said. "Spending money on a useless cow," they laughed. But the figure walked forward without turning back, leading the cow away from the chains, away from the market. Step by step she followed, her body heavy but her spirit lighter. Every step carried her farther from death, closer to something unknown. As they passed through the market gate, the sun touched her face once again. This time it did not feel like farewell, it felt like a beginning. Her ears twitched, her heart beat steady, her eyes blinked against the light. For the first time she dared to wonder, was this the end of her suffering or the start of something greater? The figure walked ahead, silent but sure, and the cow followed, her ropes no longer chains of despair but a path to hope. The market faded behind them, the noise of greed replaced by the quiet of the open road. Her story was changing, though she could not yet see where. It would lead. All she knew was that in a world that once saw her as nothing, one human had seen her as something, and that single choice had already begun to rewrite her fate. But destiny is never simple, and journeys are never without struggle. Though she had been saved from the market, her trials were not yet over, for the road ahead held challenges unknown, dangers unseen, and a future still uncertain. Yet within her chest the faint spark of hope glowed brighter than before, and as she walked beside the human who had claimed her, the question remained, would this stranger truly be her savior, or would fate find another way to test her? The road away from the market was long and quiet. The giant cow walked slowly, her heavy body still weak from fear, her heart still unsure of what had just happened. Behind her, the noise of the market faded. The laughter, the shouting, the cruel voices all disappeared into the distance. Ahead of her was only silence, broken by the steady footsteps of the human who had bought her. This human did not pull her roughly, did not shout at her, did not treat her like an object. The rope was loose, the hands gentle, and every step felt different from what she had known before. She looked at the back of this stranger with wide, searching eyes. Who was this person, and why had they chosen her? She was too big, too heavy, too useless for calves. At least that is what everyone said. So why had this human spent money on her? Why had they stood up when everyone else wanted her gone? The road curved through green fields, where the grass waved softly in the wind. Birds flew above, their songs filling the air with peace. The cow breathed slowly, her chest rising and falling. As she tried to calm the storm inside her, her eyes blinked against the sunlight, and for the first time it did not feel like goodbye. It felt like a second chance, though she was still afraid to believe it. After hours of walking, they reached a small gate. Beyond it was a place unlike the crowded market or the noisy farm she had left behind. Here the land was open, wide, and free. The human opened the gate and led her inside. The cow stepped carefully, her hooves pressing into soft soil, her eyes scanning the space. There were trees for shade, fresh grass for grazing, and a quiet pond that reflected the sky. It was simple, but it felt safe. The human removed the rope from her neck. For a moment, the cow froze, confused. She expected another chain, another order, another demand, but the rope fell to the ground, and she was free to move. She lifted her head, her ears twitching, her eyes wide with surprise. She had never felt this before, the feeling of being unchained, the feeling of choice. Slowly she stepped forward, sniffing the grass, lowering her head to take a bite. The taste was sweeter than any grass she had ever known, not because of the field, but because it was eaten in freedom. The human watched quietly, not rushing her, not forcing her. They stood with patience, as if they understood that trust cannot be demanded, only earned. The cow looked at them again, her eyes soft with confusion. She wondered if this was real, if this kindness would last. She wondered if she was safe, or if tomorrow the ropes would return. But for now, she decided to take one small step into this new world. Days passed slowly, and each day the cow discovered something new. She discovered the joy of lying under the shade of trees without fear of being kicked or chained. She discovered the warmth of the sun on her back as she grazed freely. She discovered the sound of her own hooves running across open ground, and though she was still large, still different, no one here laughed at her. No one judged her, though a human cared for her, bringing water, brushing her coat, speaking softly even when she did not understand the words. For the first time she began to feel like more than a burden. She began to feel alive, but deep inside, the shadows of her past still lingered. At night she dreamed of the farm, the angry voices, the market, the cruel laughter. Sometimes she woke trembling, her body shaking as if the ropes were still around her neck. The human would come, standing quietly nearby, offering comfort without force, and though she could not speak, the cow felt the message in their presence. "You are safe now," their silence seemed to say. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in orange and gold, the cow stood near the pond. Her reflection stared back at her, large and heavy, the very thing that once cursed her. But now in this place her size did not feel like a curse, it felt like strength. The human walked to her side, placing a gentle hand on her neck. She turned her head, meeting their eyes, and for the first time she did not see herself as useless. For the first time, she believed she was worth something. Still, the world outside was not kind. Whispers spread in the village about the human, who wasted money on a cow too big to breed. Some called them foolish, some mocked them. Others warned that kindness to animals brings no profit, but the human ignored the voices, choosing instead to see the cow not as property, but as a life. The cow did not know these words, but she felt their meaning in every action, in every meal she was given, in every moment of freedom she was allowed. And yet, deep in her heart, a question remained. Would this peace last? Or would the cruel world find its way back to take it from her? Would she be allowed to live with dignity? Or would her past catch her once again? As the night settled over the land, stars twinkling above, the cow closed her eyes. Her heart whispered a prayer, fragile but full of hope. Please let this not be a dream. Please let this last. The human stood nearby, watching the gentle giant rest under the stars. They knew the road ahead would not be easy, that challenges would come. But in that quiet moment, under the silver light of the moon, a bond had been formed, one that would change both their lives forever. And as the wind carried the night's silence, the story of the giant cow was no longer one of despair. It was becoming a story of survival, trust, and the first fragile steps toward love. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks slowly became months. The giant cow, once feared and unwanted, began to change in ways no one expected. Her body was still large, still heavy, still the same shape that once made people call her useless. But inside her something was waking, something that had been buried under fear and sadness. She was learning how to trust. At first her steps were small, her eyes still wide with doubt, her heart still heavy with memories of chains. But each day, the human who had bought her showed the same kindness, never rushing, never forcing. They brought her food with gentle hands. They brushed her coat slowly. They stood near her with patience. And slowly she began to see that not all humans were the same. The ones from the farm had seen her as a burden, but this one saw her as life. One morning, she lifted her head to the sky and felt the sun on her face. It warmed her body, and for the first time she did not feel like hiding. She walked to the field with steady steps, her hooves pressing into soft earth, her ears twitching with the sound of birds. The human watched from a distance, smiling as she lowered her head to graze, free and unchained. It was a simple moment, but for the cow, it was the beginning of her transformation. She started to move more. Her legs that once shook with fear now carried her across the open field. She ran, not because anyone forced her, but because she wanted to feel the wind. Her large body thundered across the grass, yet instead of clumsy, she looked powerful. The human laughed softly, clapping their hands in joy, and the cow, though she did not understand the sound, felt the happiness in it. At night, she lay under the stars, not with fear, but with peace. The memories of the market and the cruel voices still came, but they no longer controlled her. She had a safe place now, and each night, that truth grew stronger in her heart. Her eyes, once dull with sorrow, now shone with life. Her ears, once drooping with despair, now lifted at the sound of kindness. Even her body, though large and heavy, carried a new grace, a new strength that came from freedom. The villagers noticed the change, though they whispered among themselves about the cow that had once been sold for meat but now roamed freely. Some still mocked, calling her a waste of money. But others began to wonder, their voices softer. "Perhaps she is not useless after all," a woman said. "Perhaps she only needed someone to see her differently," another replied. The human did not answer the whispers. They only continued to care for her, knowing that transformation was not about what others saw, but about what the cow was becoming. One afternoon, children from the village came near the field. At first, the cow froze, memories of laughter and pointing rushing back. But these children were different. They approached slowly, their hands open, their voices gentle. One little girl reached out with a piece of grass. Her eyes wide with innocence, the cow hesitated, her breath quick, her heart unsure. But the girl did not force. She only waited. And slowly, carefully, the cow lowered her head and took the grass. The children laughed, not in cruelty, but in joy. And for the first time, the cow felt the touch of kindness from little hands. Her transformation grew deeper. She was no longer the silent giant waiting for her end. She was learning to live, to trust, to hope. She even began to play, tossing her head, kicking her legs, splashing water at the pond. Her joy was clumsy but beautiful, her spirit alive in ways it had never been. The human watched with tears in their eyes, knowing that this was the cow's true self. Not a burden, not meat, not useless, but a living soul filled with light. Still, shadows sometimes returned. When storms came and thunder shook the sky, she trembled, remembering the harsh voices and the ropes. But the human was always there, standing near, whispering softly, offering calm, and little by little, even the storms lost their power over her. Her transformation was not only in body but in spirit. She was becoming whole again, piece by piece. One evening, as the sun set in red and gold, the cow stood tall at the edge of the field, her large body glowing in the fading light. Her eyes strong, her breath steady. The human came to her side, placing a hand gently on her. In that moment, the cow no longer felt like a burden. She no longer felt like a mistake. She felt like she belonged. But the world beyond the quiet field was not as kind. Whispers of her story spread further, reaching people who did not care about compassion. Some saw her as a symbol of waste, some as proof that kindness was foolish, and others, darker still, saw her size and strength as something to be taken, something to be used. The cow did not know these dangers yet, but the human sensed them. They knew that protecting her would not always be easy, for the world often tests what it does not understand. And so, while the cow's transformation had brought her peace, it also placed her on a new path, a path where her survival, her freedom, and her newfound joy would be challenged again. But, within her heart, stronger than fear, brighter than sorrow, was a flame that could not be broken. She was no longer the cow waiting for death. She was the cow learning to live. And as the stars appeared in the sky, her story was far from over. It was only just beginning to show the power of change. The question remained, would the world allow her to keep this new life, or would it try once more to take it away? The days of peace were sweet, but peace is a fragile gift. The giant cow had begun to trust, had begun to live with hope, but the world beyond the quiet field was not blind to her. News of her survival spread through the village and beyond. Carried by whispers and curious voices, some told her story with wonder, others with laughter, and a few with greed. To the kind, she was a miracle, a life saved from certain death. To the cruel, she was a wasted chance for profit. And to the greedy, she was nothing more than a prize waiting to be taken. The human who had rescued her knew this, knew that the world was never simple, never gentle for long. One morning, Strangers came to the gate. They looked at the cow with narrow eyes, their hands resting on their hips, their voices sharp. "She is too big to keep. Too costly to feed," they said. "You should sell her before she eats you poor." Another added with a mocking smile. The human stood firm, their eyes steady, their voice calm. "She is not for sale," they replied. The strangers laughed, but there was no kindness in the sound. "You will regret it," one muttered before walking away. The cow watched from the field, her ears twitching at the tone, her heart sensing danger. She did not understand their words, but she felt the weight of their eyes, the sharpness of their voices. Something inside her told her that not all battles were behind her, that new ones were already forming. Days later, food became harder to find. The human worked tirelessly, carrying hay, fetching water, struggling to provide enough for the giant cow. The villagers whispered again. "Why waste so much on her?" they asked. "She gives nothing back," others said. But the human ignored them, choosing compassion over profit, choosing kindness over comfort. The cow saw their effort, felt their care, and in her heart, she wanted to give something in return. Her transformation had made her stronger, but now challenges tested her spirit. Storms came, heavy rains turning the field into mud, winds shaking the trees, thunder rolling. Across the sky the cow trembled, memories of chains and cruel voices rushing back with every crash of lightning. But the human stayed close, standing in the rain, whispering soft words, offering comfort. Together, they endured the storm, and when the sun returned, the cow lifted, her head higher than before. But storms of nature were not the only trials. One night shadows moved near the field, whispers in the dark, footsteps near the gate, men with greedy eyes returning. "She is worth a fortune in meat," one said. "If we take her, no one will stop us," another whispered. The cow sensed the danger, her body tense, her breath heavy. The human woke to the noise, rushing to the gate with a lantern in hand. The light scattered the shadows, and the men fled into the night. But the warning was clear. The cow's new life was not safe, not yet secure. Despite the threats, the cow continued to grow. Her trust deepened, her bond with the human grew unbreakable. She began to walk beside them without fear, her head high, her steps steady. She began to stand tall even when villagers mocked, her eyes calm, her body strong. She had once been the cow who trembled in silence, but now she was the cow who endured. Still, each day carried weight. Every mouthful of food was a test, every storm a reminder, every shadow a threat. The human never complained, but the struggle showed in their tired eyes, their worn hands. The cow watched, and though she could not speak, she longed to tell them she understood. She longed to share their burden. She began to stay closer, guarding the field with her size, her presence alone enough to keep strangers away. Her body, once called useless, now stood like a shield, powerful and protective. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in red and purple, the cow stood at the edge of the field. Her gaze stretched beyond the horizon, where shadows gathered, where whispers grew. Her heart felt the truth. Her story was not finished. Her challenges were not over. The world would test her again and again. But she was no longer the cow of despair. She was the cow of strength, the cow of survival. The human came to her side, their hand resting on her neck, their voice soft. "We will face it together," they whispered. The cow lowered her head, pressing closer, her eyes closing in trust. In that moment, a promise was made, silent but powerful. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would not face them alone. But the night carried an uneasy silence. The stars glowed above. The field lay calm, yet somewhere beyond, the greedy still planned. The cruel still waited. The cow's heart beat steady, but her ears twitched at every sound. She knew the peace was fragile. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. Her story was no longer about fear. It was about courage. Yet courage is always tested, and hers would soon be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. The nights grew quieter, the storms passed, and the whispers of danger faded into the distance. The giant cow had faced fear, cruelty, and greed, yet here she stood, alive, strong, and free. Her journey from despair to hope had changed her, but it had also changed the human who saved her. Together, they had built something greater than survival. They had built trust. They had built love. Each morning, the cow rose with the sun, her breath soft in the cool air, her large body glowing in the golden light. She no longer walked with trembling steps, no longer lowered her head in shame. Instead, she walked with strength. Her ears alert, her eyes calm, her spirit unbroken. The human watched her with pride, knowing that every scar she carried was now proof of her survival. Villagers still whispered, some with doubt, some with wonder. Why save her? Some asked. She gives nothing back. But others began to see differently, their voices gentler. Perhaps life itself is enough reason, a man said. Perhaps compassion is the greatest return, another added. The cow did not understand their words, but she felt the change in the air. For once, not every voice spoke against her. Some voices now spoke for her. Children came often to the field, their laughter soft, their hands gentle. They fed her grass, they brushed her coat, they ran alongside her heavy steps. The cow learned to trust them too, her heart opening wider with each day. She was no longer a shadow of fear. She was becoming a symbol of kindness, a symbol that even a life once unwanted could find meaning. The human never sought reward, never asked for praise. They worked hard, their hands rough, their body tired but their heart full. For them, saving the cow was not about profit, not about gain. It was about love, about seeing life where others saw nothing. In their quiet bond there was a lesson stronger than words, that compassion is never wasted, that kindness always matters. One evening, as the sky turned orange and purple, the cow stood near the pond. Her reflection shimmered in the water, large and powerful yet peaceful. She remembered the farm, the chains, the cruel voices, the market filled with greed, and she remembered the moment one voice rose above it all, the moment everything changed. Her journey had been filled with pain, but now it was also filled with hope. Her heart, once heavy with sorrow, now carried light. The human stepped beside her, their hand resting gently on her neck. They looked at her with eyes full of pride and love. You were once seen as nothing, but now you are everything, their heart seemed to say. And though the cow could not answer, her eyes shone with understanding. She pressed her head softly against them, a silent thank you, a promise of trust. The villagers who once mocked now came to watch. They saw not just a cow, but a story of survival, of strength, of second chances. Some even began to change, their hearts, their children asking questions. Why did no one save her before, they asked. Why did she have to suffer first? And the adults, though silent, began to see the truth. Sometimes it takes one act of courage to open many eyes. The cow had become more than herself. She was no longer just a creature spared from death. She was a reminder, a living lesson, that every life has value, that compassion can change fate, and that sometimes the greatest power is not in strength, but in kindness. As the seasons passed, her bond with the human only grew stronger. Through storms, through hunger, through shadows of greed, they had remained together. Every challenge they faced became proof of their bond. Every scar became proof of their journey. And though the world outside still carried cruelty, their little field had become a place of peace. One night, under a sky filled with stars, the cow lay quietly in the grass. The human sat nearby, tired but content, watching the gentle giant rest. The silence of the night carried no fear, only peace. It was a silence that told a story that began with despair but ended with hope, a story that showed how one choice, one act of courage, could change everything. The final message of her life was clear. She was once sold for meat, treated as useless, abandoned by all. But one human saw her differently. One human gave her a chance, and because of that, she lived, not just survived, but lived. She became proof that compassion has power, that kindness can rewrite even the darkest story. And so, the giant cow stood tall, no longer a burden, no longer a shadow. She was life. She was hope. She was love. Her journey was not just her own. It was a message to the world that no soul is too big, too small, too broken, or too different to deserve a chance. And as the sun rose once more over the fields, her story carried on. Not a story of meat or profit, but a story of compassion, survival, and the power of one human heart.